Greetings, folks. Well, I thought I might wade in on this whole marriage thing. And congratulations, North Carolina, in entrenching and solidifying your ignorance. Cue applause. Cue applause. Cue applause. Thank you. Thank you for showing this. Anyways, I wanted to talk a bit about this marriage thing and how, well, first of all, tradition. I don't care for it at all. It's a bag of shit for me. A tradition, any kind of. I don't even celebrate my own birthday. Like, I could care less. It's not a miracle to be born. You know what? If you want to celebrate anything on your birthday, you should celebrate medical science, maybe. The breakthroughs of technology, progress, stuff like that, because that's what has allowed you to live another year, to go another orbit around the sun. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't celebrate really anything. I don't really care for any of it at all. But, for those of you who do, and you care about this thing, marriage in particular, like, I don't see, the whole same-sex marriage thing is a joke to me because Christians, for some reason, in particular, seem to think they have some kind of ownership of this. And it's obvious they don't. I mean, we have records going all the way back to Egyptian times, pre-Judaic times, yes, that talk about marriage. So it's not God who made it. It's not Jesus who sanctions it. And in fact, I just want to briefly talk about a couple of things. First off, I saw this really great documentary by Terry Jones, Monty Python fame, The Surprising History of Sex and Love. Now, I can't find it again because it was on topdocumentaryfilms.com, and it's gone now. So it was really great because that was one of the first times I ever heard anything about the history of marriage kind of thing, and he talks a lot about that. That's a big part of it, and he mentions, I think it's not until the 6th or 8th century, I think he says, or something like that, that the church, the Roman Catholic Church, that is, and it's the only church that was the only Christian thing around at the time going, didn't recognize it until the 6th or 8th century. Now, I have some other information I'll talk about later, which actually sets that back even closer to now, like the 10th, 11th, 12th century. So, but I want to first talk about the Bible, and not the Old Testament. Don't give a shit about it, because that's a whole bunch of gobbledygook anyways. I want to talk a bit about Paul's views on marriage. Now, he was single, and in 1 Corinthians 7, 1 to 9, he addresses a problem they have in Corinth, in the church of Corinth. Here we go. Now, concerning the things of which you wrote to me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due to her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except with consent for a time, that you may give yourself to a fasting and prayer, and come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. But I say this is as a concession, not as a commandment. For I wish that all men were even as myself, because Paul was single, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. But I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am, single. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So, wow. It doesn't seem like Paul has a high regard for this, and this is echoed later on by some of the other later church fathers and such. Christianity was very aesthetic to begin with. It was very just your focus is on Jesus and God and worship. It's not about the world. It's not about things about the world, right? And marriage is very much about the world. So, and there's some other things. I mean, he talks about, but I mean, you get the gist of it. He doesn't have a high regard for marriage. It's more of a thing to say, okay, you guys are gonna want to have sex, and sex is not good until unless you're kind of married, I guess, because I mean, Adam and Eve, right? So get married then, I guess. Not a high opinion. Now the next little point I like to discuss briefly is it's a good website I found called Magnus Hirschfeld Archive for Sexology. I'll leave a link down below, stick somewhere. Anyways, it's a history of marriage in Western civilization. Now it's a good summary of everything else I've kind of found and looked up. I'll read parts of it here that are pertinent to the conversation that we're having. So, marriage, as we know it, in our Western civilization today, has a long history with roots in several very different ancient cultures, of which the Romans, Hebrew, and Germanic are the most important. Western marriage has further been shaped by the doctrines and policies of the medieval Christian Church, the demands of the Protestant Reformation, and the social impact of the Industrial Revolution. All right. So that's kind of a summary. Roman, Hebrew, and Germanic, and then medieval Christian Church jumped in later on. Medieval. Remember that. Now it goes on to talk about marriage in ancient Greece and Rome, which is basically a civil contract, private contract, nothing to do with government or religion really. And a lot of times it had to do with families getting together for economic and political reasons, generally. It talks about marriage in ancient Israel, which is the Old Testament kind of stuff, which is a bunch of gobbledygook. Doesn't really pertain to what we're talking about at all. Now we come to marriage in medieval Europe. The rise of Christianity produced a profound change in European marriage laws and customs, although this change came about only gradually. The first Christian emperors were more or less content with the traditional Roman law, which is civil and private matters. However, under varying political and religious pressures, they alternately broadened and restricted the divorce regulations. They also repealed older laws which had penalized the unmarried and childless, since the new Christian asceticism favored virginity and sexual abstinence over marriage. In most other respects, they resisted change. Marriage and divorce continued to be civil and private matters. In the following centuries, however, marriage came more and more under the influence of the Church. Compared to Rome, the newly Christianized countries of Northern Europe had rather barbaric marriage customs and treated women little better than domestic slaves. In Germanic law, for example, marriage was essentially a business deal excuse me, between the bridegroom and the bride's father, a sale marriage. The symbol of a successful bride sale was the ring, a form of down payment which was given to the bride herself. Acceptance of the ring constituted betrothal. The full payment of the bride price was made on delivery, that is, when the actual wedding took place. Since then, the ring has acquired many other symbolic meanings and indeed is still used in our modern marriage ceremonies. The civilizing influence of the Church soon refined these primitive customs. According to Roman law and Christian belief, marriage could be built only on the free consent of both partners, and this doctrine was bound to raise the status of women. Bravo! Furthermore, theologians increasingly found religious significance in marriage and eventually even included it among the sacraments. Eventually, this is medieval. Eventually. This also endowed a formerly rather prosaic arrangement with a new dignity. Unfortunately, at the same time, the Church created two new problems. It abolished divorce by declaring marriage to be insoluble except by death, and greatly increased the number of marriage prohibitions. They talk about affinity and spiritual affinity and all this kind of weird stuff. Here we go. As a result of these new regulations, the influence of the church on marriage was greatly strengthened. Very often, extensive clerical investigations were necessary to prove or disprove the existence of impediments, the previous stuff. For example, marriages that had been entered in ignorance or defiance of such impediments were considered null and void. In these cases, the church was therefore willing to pronounce an annulment. Since divorce was no longer permitted, an annulment is the only way of dissolving a marriage, and thus many married couples who had tired of each other sooner or later conveniently discovered some previously overlooked marriage impediment. The church also began to post so-called bans before each wedding, inviting anyone with knowledge of an impediment to come forward. The growing church involvement in marriage could further be seen in the development of a special religious wedding ceremony. Wow. Not until the medieval times. Interesting. In the first Christian centuries, marriage had been a strictly private arrangement. As late as the 10th century, the essential part of the wedding itself took place outside the church door. No church involvement, right? It was not until the 12th century that a priest became part of the wedding ceremony, and not until the 13th century that they actually took charge of the proceedings. Nevertheless, it remained understood that even as a sacrament, marriage sprang from the free consent of the two partners, and that therefore neither the parents nor the priest nor the government could affect its validity. It thus became possible for couples to get married secretly if they could not obtain anyone else's approval. It also became possible for very young children to be married if their parents could coax the necessity consent out of them. Especially aristocratic families often took advantage of this possibility when they found a politically advantageous match for their little sons or daughters. On the average, however, males married in their mid-20s, and females in their early teens, that is, soon after their first menstruation. Today, it may be tempting to see medieval marriage in the light of certain lofty religious doctrines in the poetry of the troubadours. However, throughout most of the Middle Ages, and for the greater part of the population, marriage remained a practical economic affair. Romantic love hardly had any place in it. Moreover, the social and legal status of women, while somewhat improved in some countries, continued to be very low. Interesting, eh? Interesting. So, I know it's all about same sex. I know they're talking about a man and a woman, and that's what God meant. Well, who cares what God meant? Because who cares? If people love each other, what's the problem? Like, it's so sad. So sad to be burning these energies in such wasteful ways when we can be doing other things. It just makes me sad. And it makes me sad to see this ignorance entrenched. Like, wow. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Seriously. I hear some of your politicians alluding to like earthquakes being the result of homosexuality being accepted. Come on, folks. Come on. So, anyways. So pathetic. Oh, it makes me so angry at the same time. Discuss. I'd like to know your thoughts, your feelings, what you gotta say. Thanks. Till next time. Hey, these folks. Thought I might add a little addendum here onto the end of this video. 2 more paragraphs out of that little thing. This is marriage in modern Europe and America. So the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century rejected the prevailing concept of marriage along with many other Catholic doctrines. Martin Luther declared marriage to be a worldly thing that belongs to the realm of government, and a similar opinion was expressed by Calvin. The English Puritans of the 17th century even passed an act of Parliament asserting marriage to be no sacrament, and soon thereafter made marriage purely secular. It was no longer to be performed by a minister, but by a justice of the peace. The Restoration abolished this law and reverted to the old system, but the Puritans brought their concept of marriage to America, where it survived. Luther and other Protestants also reduced the number of marriage impediments. Affinity and spiritual affinity were no longer considered obstacles, and consanguinity was interpreted much more narrowly than before. Thus, even marriages between first cousins became possible. The Catholic Church, in response to the Protestant challenge, took its stand in the Council of Trent, and in 1563 confirmed its previous doctrines. Indeed, it now demanded that all marriages take place before a priest and two witnesses. Among other things, this virtually eliminated not only secret marriages, but also the formerly common informal marriages. These, similar to the old Roman marriages by usus, were based simply on mutual consent without formal ceremony. In England, they came to be called common law marriages, and since Henry VIII had broken with Rome, they continued to be permitted until 1753, when the Church of England was put in charge of all marriages, including those of Catholics, but excluding those of Quakers and Jews. This development did not affect the English colonies, however, and thus common law marriages remained possible in America. As recently as 1970, they were still recognized in several states. So that's the last little bit I wanted to read, just in case nobody goes to that page to take a look at what I used as a bit of a source. But further to that, I think I don't know why government even recognized marriage. They just take all those benefits, all those whatever laws and benefits and policies they have that constitute marriage, and just apply it all to civil unions. Just recognize civil unions, and that's it. You can call it whatever you freaking want to, and it's just a civil union. Whether two people get married in front of a justice of the peace, in front of a priest, a pastor, reverend, whatever, doesn't matter. I don't understand why government is even recognizing marriage, since, well, your government especially, since in the States you've got a secular government, so I don't even know why they recognize marriage at all. It should just be civil unions. Anyways, so, because according to you, marriage is religious, so shouldn't be even, who cares about your marriage? So, anyways, take care. We'll talk to you later.